They said I was lost in the storm, that I must have gotten confused, disoriented, wandered off and crashed my car off some mountain road in the middle of a blizzard. They said I was lucky to survive, that the cold should have killed me, but no one could explain how I ended up in a locked vehicle, with no keys, no footprints, no phone, and a cut across my palm that looked too deliberate to be an accident. And no one could explain why my husband waited 3 full days to report me missing. My name is Julia Carter, and I know when someone wants me gone. The morning I came back, if you can call it that, I walked barefoot down a snowy road until a truck driver saw me and pulled over, shouting something about God and miracles. My throat was too raw to answer him. My thoughts were ice shards slicing through fog. I kept asking the same question, not out loud, just in my head, over and over. Why didn't he come looking for me? By the time I was brought to the hospital, I couldn't stop shaking, not from the cold, from something worse. Like my body knew before my brain did, this wasn't an accident, and whatever had happened to me didn't end in that car. They let me call Nate, my husband, after I was cleared by doctors. He answered on the first ring, voice trembling with concern. "Julia, oh my God, where are you? I've been losing my mind." But I didn't hear panic in his voice. I heard performance, polished, measured, too perfect. I told them not to discharge me right away. I said I was dizzy, still confused. The truth, I just needed time, a quiet place to think. I replayed what little I remembered. Cold, silence, a loud bang, then darkness. Back home, Nate had already told his version of the story to everyone who would listen. "Julia must have gone for a drive," he'd said, "just to clear her head. She's been so stressed." Stressed, yes, because I'd just learned he'd forged my signature on financial documents tied to my late father's estate, because I confronted him, because I'd told him I was considering filing for divorce. That was 4 days before I vanished. He picked me up from the hospital like nothing happened. He hugged me tight, handed me my favorite coffee, told the nurse how thankful he was. He cried when we got in the car. A single tear that disappeared before I could tell if it was real. At home, I noticed things out of place. My suitcase was missing from the closet, a drawer with personal papers had been emptied, the guest bedroom door, which I never locked, had a new latch on it. Nate said he'd made some updates while I was gone. I nodded, I smiled, and I didn't believe a damn word. The second night I remembered something, a sound, like a door slamming, then someone saying, "She'll ruin everything if she talks." I wrote it down. I started writing everything down. Every lie, every inconsistency, every fake smile Nate gave me when he thought I wasn't looking. He wanted me to feel crazy, to question myself, to wonder if maybe I had wandered off after all, but he underestimated one thing. I wasn't broken, I was aware, and I was going to prove it. I called my friend Claire, the only person I trusted. She worked in tech and owed me a favor from years ago. I asked her to help me retrieve anything from the house cameras. She hesitated. "Julia," she said, "those files should have been overwritten by now. Try anyway." 2 hours later, she called back. Her voice was tight. "I found something, but you're not going to like it." She sent me a video clip. In it, Nate was standing in the hallway at 2:13 a.m., the night I disappeared. He had my phone in one hand and a piece of paper in the other. He looked up, paused, and stared straight into the lens. Then he smiled. Not like a man worried about his missing wife, like a man who thought the camera had been disabled. I stared at that frame until my chest felt too tight to breathe. He didn't just let me disappear, he made sure I did. I didn't confront him that night, I didn't cry. I waited until he fell asleep, then slipped into the guest room. I checked the closet, the one he'd suddenly locked. Inside, I found my old journal, shoved into a shoebox. Torn pages. My name scratched out on several entries. He'd been trying to erase me long before I woke up in that car. I sat on the edge of the bed and whispered, "Not this time." And that's when I decided, If he wanted me erased, I'd become the one story he couldn't bury. The next morning, Nate left early, said he had meetings downtown. I didn't ask questions. I smiled, nodded, watched him close the door. Then I locked it behind him. I didn't have much time. I grabbed my laptop and plugged in the flash drive Claire sent me. The file was still there, Nate's face lit by hallway light, standing exactly where he claimed he never was. He looked calm, collected, and guilty. I trimmed the clip, paused it at the moment he looked into the lens. I saved the frame, added it to a folder I labeled Truth. I wasn't planning revenge, I was building a case, because if I walked into the police station right now, they'd ask for proof. And thanks to Nate's arrogance, I had the start of it. Claire called again an hour later. "I didn't sleep last night," she said. "There's more footage. I found a second angle, basement cam. I thought it was offline." "What's on it?" A pause, then, "You, Julia, he carried you." Her voice cracked. "You weren't walking." The silence on the line said more than the words. I closed my eyes, holding back the wave rising in my chest. Not fear, not even rage. Validation. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't confused. Someone tried to stage my disappearance. "Send me everything," I said. By noon, I had a second file. It showed Nate coming down the stairs with my limp body over his shoulder. He moved slowly, methodically, like someone carrying boxes, not a person. He paused, adjusted his grip, then disappeared out of frame. There was a timestamp, 1:56 a.m. He told the police I left the house around 10:30, that he assumed I was driving to clear my head, that he waited until morning to call friends. But he didn't call anyone until the third day, and by then his voice had already changed. It wasn't fear, it was preparation. I knew what that meant. He was trying to establish a narrative. I made a list, timestamps, inconsistencies, statements from friends who'd heard different versions of his story. I highlighted the gaps in red. Then I sent Claire one message. "I need a backup, something off-site." She replied in under a minute, "Already done." That night, Nate came home with takeout and a tired smile. "How are you feeling?" he asked, kissing the top of my head. "I thought we could watch something easy tonight, not too intense." I nodded. He set the food on the table, asked if I'd taken my meds. I lied, told him yes. He didn't know I flushed them. Whatever he was giving me wasn't just a painkiller, it was slowing my brain, making me forget details. But that fog was gone now. I watched him eat, studied his movements, how he controlled the pace of conversation, how he dodged questions by asking his own. "Do you ever think about what you'd do if I hadn't come back?" I asked suddenly. He looked up. "I don't want to think about that," he said. "I'm just glad you're here." "But you didn't look for me." Silence. He forced a smile. "I didn't know where to start." I nodded, taking a sip of water, hiding the tremble in my hand. He was good, too good. But even good liars forget that video doesn't lie. After he fell asleep, I uploaded both clips to an encrypted folder and added a password only Claire and I shared. Then I opened a blank document, the title, "What Happened to Me?" I began writing everything I remembered, every flash, sound, feeling. The words poured out like someone opening a valve that had been shut for years. I wrote about the moment I realized the basement door was unlocked, about the sound of boots on gravel, about waking up in the car, blood crusted on my hand, the windows ice shut from inside. That car hadn't been my escape. It had been my holding place. Whoever parked it there, he never planned on coming back, and that's when it hit me. He thought the cold would do the rest. No bruises, no wounds, just a tragic accident. The air left my lungs. I closed the laptop. This wasn't just manipulation. It was an attempt to end me, wrapped in the comfort of plausible grief. The next day, I visited my father's old estate lawyer, pretending it was a routine check-in. I asked casually if any documents had been altered or reissued recently. He paused. "Well, Someone requested updated copies 2 months ago. I assumed it was you. It wasn't, I said. I asked for copies. He hesitated but handed them over. The signature on the updated file wasn't mine. It looked close, but not close enough. And next to it, Nate's handwriting. Sloppy, confident. Like he didn't think anyone would look closely. I added it to my folder. My case was growing teeth. Now I just needed to let it bite. That night, I told Nate I was going to stay at a friend's for the weekend. He didn't object. He almost looked relieved. Less pressure, less eyes. Take the time you need, he said. He even offered to pack a bag for me. I declined, and once the door closed behind me, I didn't head to Claire's. I went straight to the detective handling missing persons. I handed over the USB drive, the documents, and my statement. When he finished reading, he didn't say anything at first, just looked at me and said, "We'll be in touch." I stood to leave. He stopped me. "Julia, are you sure you're safe to go back tonight?" I shook my head. "I'm not going back," I said. Not ever. I didn't go back home. Instead, I checked into a small motel on the edge of town, paid in cash, no real name. Claire knew where I was, and that was enough. I left my car parked 2 blocks away, walked in through the back entrance, and pulled the curtains tight. I wasn't hiding out of fear. I was preparing, because I knew something Nate didn't. People like him always make the same mistake. They believe their charm is stronger than the truth, that they can outrun facts, that if they say a lie enough times, it becomes real, but not this time. That morning, Detective Heller called. His tone had changed, measured, cautious, but alert. "We're taking your evidence seriously," he said. "We're opening a case." "What about the footage?" I asked. "We verified the timestamps. It aligns with the night you disappeared, and the movement patterns match your account." "Can you arrest him?" "Not yet, but he knows we're watching now." That was the part that worried me. By the next day, Nate had already started to shift the story. I found out through mutual friends, calls, messages, little whispers that made their way to me like breadcrumbs. "She's struggling. The trauma made her paranoid." "She's not well." "She's seeing things that aren't there." They were subtle, not outright accusations, just enough to frame me as unreliable, unstable. Classic move. Discredit the witness before the truth catches fire. Claire sent me screenshots. One of Nate's social media posts stood out. "When someone you love goes missing and then comes back a stranger, you just pray they find peace." The comments were full of sympathy, prayers, empathy for him, not for me. I didn't respond. I didn't post anything. I didn't explain or defend. Instead, I sent everything I had, every document, every video file, every falsified signature, to a lawyer specializing in inheritance fraud. I didn't care about the money. I cared about the pattern: fraud, manipulation, deception, and now possibly attempted murder. That's not a messy marriage. That's a crime. The lawyer didn't take long. He forged 2 key documents, she confirmed, and the transfer of your trust fund, that happened after you were reported missing. After. He wasn't just getting rid of me, he was cashing me out. The turning point came 3 days later. I got a message from Nate's former assistant. She never liked me much, always polite but distant. This time, she sounded different. Urgent. "I saw your video," she wrote. "The hallway footage. He said the system was down." I called her. She picked up, voice tight. "He told me to wipe the drives." "What?" "The security footage. He said the power outage corrupted the files. I didn't know you were. I didn't think you'd come back." "What else did he say?" "That he was scared, that you'd turn everything into something it's not." That's when I started wondering. I stayed quiet, letting her fill the silence. "I still have a backup," she added. "I saved one of the drive images before formatting the others, in case." "In case of what?" "In case someone asked the right questions." That backup held 2 more angles. One from the garage, one from the entry hall. Together, they formed a sequence, Nate dragging my body, the time gaps, the false reports, the cleanup. It was enough. I turned it all over to Hella. Within 48 hours, a subpoena was issued for Nate's financial records. They matched the timeline perfectly. The insurance inquiries, the forged estate forms, the sudden closing of accounts, and then came the final crack. A deleted voice memo, recovered from Nate's phone by a forensic technician. She's going to ruin this. I can't let her take it all. No name, no direct threat. But the timestamp placed it 1 hour before the security footage showed him carrying me. It was the last piece. That night, I stood outside the house I used to call home. The lights were on. He was inside, pretending everything was normal, baking the same story for the world to eat. But I wasn't his wife anymore. I was the consequence. When the police pulled up, he didn't fight, he didn't cry, he didn't scream. He just stood there, hands raised slowly, like the air had finally gotten heavy enough to press him down. I didn't smile, I didn't need to. The truth was louder than anything he ever said. 2 days later, the court granted a protection order. His lawyer requested a gag clause. My lawyer laughed. We declined. The footage had already spread, quietly at first, then faster. Private groups, survivor networks, advocacy blogs. People weren't just watching my story, they were sending me theirs. And I realized something I hadn't expected to feel. Purpose. He tried to erase me. Instead, I became proof. The headlines called it a domestic dispute, not a near-fatal scheme, not a planned erasure, just another story dressed in legal neutrality, neat, palatable, something people could scroll past without discomfort. But those who really knew, those who'd followed the trail I left, they saw it for what it was. The emails started pouring in, messages from strangers, some thanking me, some angry on my behalf, some silent. Just photos of bruises, court dates, unread police reports. I read them all, not because I was curious, but because I knew the silence that follows survival, and I wouldn't let theirs echo as long as mine had. The court process began quietly. Paperwork, interviews, transcripts. Detective Heller guided me through the maze, careful but firm. He'd seen too many cases like mine dissolve before impact, but this one had legs. Nate pleaded not guilty, of course. His attorney leaned into the narrative he'd spent weeks building. Concerned husband, miscommunication, unstable spouse. He panicked, the lawyer said. He thought she was a danger to herself. But not enough to call 911, I added, when I gave my statement. Not enough to search for me, just enough to move money around and prepare a cover story. The judge nodded, took notes. I saw the shift in the room. Not dramatic, just enough. What they didn't know, what Nate never considered, was that I had one more voice left in the story. My mother. She died when I was 19, left behind a few boxes, a stack of letters, and a warning I didn't understand at the time. If someone tries to rewrite your memory, write it louder. At the bottom of one of those boxes, I found an old tape recorder. On it, a recording I hadn't remembered existed. A conversation she had with her lawyer months before her death. It was about her own estate, about protecting it from someone she never named, only described. The kind who wears concern like a mask, but treats truth like a threat. When I listened to it again, it wasn't just about her, it was about me. About every woman who was told to quiet down for the sake of appearances, who was warned not to make accusations that might ruin a reputation. I sent that file to Claire, along with a note, archive it, not for court, for the future. Because some truths don't belong in headlines, they belong in history. Nate's arrest didn't stop him. 3 days later, his lawyer filed an emergency motion. Emotional distress, character defamation, intent to harm his career. The irony nearly made me laugh, but my lawyer was quicker. He responded with the original footage, the forged estate transfers, and the subpoenaed voice memo. No commentary, no drama, just fact stacked on top of fact. The motion was withdrawn by the end of the week, but the damage had already changed shape. A blog picked up the story, then a podcast, then a local news outlet ran a piece titled, "The Wife Who Wasn't Missing, Just Muffled." The comments were brutal. Half praised me, half accused me of ruining a good man. Truth lives in uncomfortable places. I didn't argue, I didn't reply, I just kept building. With Claire's help, I launched a platform, a private submission portal, anonymous stories, timelines, names, places, patterns. At first, I didn't know what I'd do with them, but the patterns started connecting faster than I expected. Same phrases, same manipulation, same excuses, different faces. It wasn't about Nate anymore. It was about the system that lets 100 versions of him walk free. Well-dressed, well-spoken, well-practiced. I named the site Not Forgotten because they tried to forget me, tried to erase what happened in whispers and polite lies, and now I was making it unforgettable. The court hearing for the forgery charges arrived in late spring. Nate looked smaller in the courtroom, not physically, something deeper, like a man who finally realized the story he built was collapsing from the inside. His voice didn't shake when he testified. He stuck to the narrative. He lied under oath. But the footage spoke louder. The bank statements, louder still, and the silence after my cross-examination, when he had nothing left to say, that was the loudest moment of all. The judge didn't rule that day, but as I left the courtroom, I passed Nate in the hallway. He looked at me like maybe there was something left to reclaim. I didn't blink. "Next time," I said quietly, "choose someone who stays quiet." Then I walked away. Not out of anger, out of survival, out of clarity. And because I had more to do, the verdict came on a Monday morning. Forgery, fraud, intent to deceive. Guilty on all counts. Not attempted murder, not yet. That case was still open, but this ruling was enough to shift the narrative, enough to expose what Nate had tried so carefully to bury. He didn't speak as the judge read the decision, just stood there, unmoving, as if waiting to wake up from a dream he'd written for himself. Outside, reporters waited. I walked past them without a word, not because I had nothing to say, because now they were finally listening without me shouting. That night, I sat across from Claire in a diner. We hadn't talked in person since the trial started. Everything had been messages, voice notes, brief calls between filings. Now, in the silence, I saw how tired we both were. She slid a folder across the table. People are still submitting. I opened it. Dozens of names, timelines, patterns. A network of harm wrapped in different disguises, different cities, same strategies, same cover stories, same manipulation dressed as care. "You created something bigger than you," Claire said. I nodded, slowly. "That's the part that scares me." "Why?" "Because I thought it would end when he got caught, but for most of them, it doesn't even begin until years later." She didn't argue. She didn't need to. We both understood. Justice doesn't arrive in courtrooms alone. Sometimes it starts with a name whispered in safety, written on a form no one was supposed to see. 2 days later, I returned to the house. It had been emptied out by court order. A legal seizure of assets tied to the fraudulent accounts. Most of it didn't matter. Furniture, electronics, things I never cared about. But I wasn't there for any of that. I was looking for a letter I once wrote, a letter I never mailed. I found it in the back of my old bookshelf, still folded, still untouched. It was written the night before I confronted Nate, the night I told him I knew. In it, I'd tried to explain what I was feeling, the doubt, the fear, the sharpness of betrayal that doesn't cut in one clean line, but in thousands of tiny, quiet wounds. Back then, I thought I might send it to him after I left. A final word, closure. Now I held it with steady hands. It was never for him. It was for me. I burned it in the sink, watched the edges curl, blacken, disappear, not out of anger, not to forget, to mark the end. The week after the verdict, I was invited to speak at a local women's shelter. Not a crowd, just a small group. 8 women, 1 counsellor, and a room full of truths that had gone ignored for too long. I didn't bring a script, I just told them the truth. Not about the footage or the trial or the legal process. About the morning I woke up in the snow and knew, with the deepest certainty, that someone I loved had decided my silence was worth more than my life, and how choosing to speak anyway felt like taking my breath back. When I finished, one of the women asked a question I hadn't prepared for. "Do you regret not leaving sooner?" I paused. "No," I said, "because the regret belongs to the people who counted on me never leaving at all." A month passed. The second case, the one they called the incident, was set to move forward. More hearings, more evidence, more time. But something had already shifted. He wasn't the man with the perfect mask anymore. His name wasn't followed by sympathy, but by silence. Unease, that was its own sentence. And while the system was slow, the weight of his choices had started to close in on him from every direction. I didn't celebrate, I moved forward. By early summer, the site Claire and I built had processed over 3,000 entries. We connected a few to real legal resources. One resulted in a reopened case. Another in a restraining order finally granted after years of denial. They weren't victories, they were cracks. Cracks that would eventually become fractures, and maybe, someday, something stronger. We renamed the project Signal, because sometimes all someone needs is a sign that they're not imagining it, that they're not alone, that their story matters. I walked by the courthouse one afternoon, watching a new case begin. I didn't know the details. I didn't need to. A woman stood at the bottom of the steps, clutching a folder to her chest like it was armor. I wanted to say something, but I didn't. She didn't need a speech. She needed space to walk in without someone rewriting her reality for her. So I watched until she disappeared behind the doors and whispered one line under my breath: "Make it undeniable." The second trial began 8 months after the first. By then I had moved cities, changed phone numbers, closed accounts, and opened new ones. Not out of fear, out of choice. Every piece of my life had been touched by Nate's manipulation. Now I was rebuilding one he couldn't reach. The state called it criminal endangerment with intent to cause harm. It wasn't the charge I expected, but it carried weight. Enough to drag everything else into light: the forged documents, the staged disappearance, the financial transfers that coincided too neatly with the night I almost didn't come home. I wasn't on the stand this time. They had my recordings, testimony, hospital records, and surveillance footage. My voice had already filled the courtroom once. It didn't need to again. Still, I sat through every session, not for revenge, for record. So no one could pretend it didn't happen. The prosecution played the hallway footage again, then the garage footage, then the memo from his phone. "She'll ruin this." They let the silence speak after each clip. The jury didn't need drama, they needed clarity. And truth, when shown plainly, doesn't need to shout. Nate's attorney did what was expected. He spoke of stress, breakdowns, misunderstandings. He suggested I had consented to leave that night, that I had staged the videos. But when questioned about the falsified dates, the real-time GPS data, and the physical condition I was found in, his defense fell apart. Quietly but completely. Nate never took the stand. He didn't have to. The jury already knew who he was. When the verdict came, guilty on all charges, there were no gasps, no outbursts, just a long exhale. I didn't celebrate. I didn't cry. I walked out of the building the same way I'd walked in, upright, composed, steady. A reporter tried to stop me. "Julia, do you have anything to say now that it's over?" I didn't pause. "Nothing's over," I said, "but now it's written." And that was enough. 3 weeks later, I received a letter. Not from Nate, from his sister. We hadn't spoken since the arrest. She had defended him at first, said I was confused, emotional, possibly unstable. She'd stood beside him at the first hearing. Now her words were different. I believed what he told me because it was easier than facing what it meant if he was lying. I'm sorry I didn't listen sooner. I didn't write back. Not because I was angry, because some apologies belong to silence. In early fall, I visited the mountain road where they found me. It was colder than I remembered, the trees sharper against the sky. I stood at the edge of the overlook, the place where everything could have ended, and tried to picture what he saw when he left me there. A problem solved? A chapter closed? Whatever it was, he was wrong. That wasn't the end of me. That was the beginning of him being exposed. I left a small marker in the snow, no name, no plaque, just a stone, solid, unmoving. Because no matter how long someone tries to rewrite your story, the truth stays exactly where it was buried, and eventually it's found. Back in the city, the platform Claire and I had built kept growing. Hundreds of stories had already made their way to support services, legal aid, shelter programs. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't fast, but it was real, tangible, needed. We got a message from a woman in Missouri, then another in Colorado, then one from a teenager in Ohio who said, "Reading these saved me." That was when I knew the most dangerous part wasn't surviving what Nate did. It was surviving the silence afterward and turning that silence into something that mattered. People still ask me if I feel vindicated, if I feel like I won. But this was never about winning. It was about naming what happened. It was about undoing the lie that harm has to look a certain way to count. It was about standing in front of the version of myself that almost stayed quiet and saying, "You were right to run, you were right to speak." And now, every time someone presses submit on our site, another version of silence breaks and another version of justice begins. Not because of me, but because I refused to disappear. I thought testifying would be the hardest part. It wasn't. What came after? The empty inbox, the quiet mornings, the realization that the fight was no longer about proving what happened, but learning how to live with it. That was harder, because once the chaos fades, you're left with the echoes. And they don't always come in screams. Sometimes they sound like nothing at all. I started volunteering at a women's clinic under a false name. They didn't need to know my story, they already had their own. I helped with intake forms, watched kids in the corner room, organized groceries and toiletries. Simple things. But I noticed patterns in how women spoke when they didn't think anyone was listening. The way they apologized for asking for help. The way they said, "It's not that bad, I just need a place for the night." The way they flinched at kindness like it was a trick. No one taught them to survive, they taught themselves. I kept thinking about that version of me who once thought she was the only one. Now I couldn't unsee how common she really was. Claire wanted to expand the Signal platform. New languages, regional networks, legal partners in more states. "We're barely keeping up," she said. "That's the problem," I told her. The system should have gotten to these women before we did. We had funding offers from charities, from journalists. But we stayed quiet for a while, took our time, because too many people wanted the story, but not the work. They wanted headlines, not infrastructure. We wanted both. Nate was sentenced in December, 7 years, no parole for the first 4. Some said it was harsh, others called it light. I didn't respond, because the real sentence started the day he realized no one believed him anymore. When the doors he used to charm open began to stay shut. When his name stopped earning him trust and started drawing suspicion. He wasn't just a man with a criminal record now. He was a name people Googled and read the truth about. That was the only legacy I needed from him. One morning, months later, I received a message on the platform. It was anonymous, but specific. "I used to live on the same street as you. I used to think you had the perfect life. Now I know what it really cost. There was no question in the message, no plea, just an acknowledgement. It stayed with me because we spend so much time curating the version of ourselves that looks untouchable, and almost none tending to the part that's already bleeding. I replied anyway. You're not the only one who saw it, you were just the first to admit it. The platform grew faster than we were ready for. We added moderators, volunteers, legal liaisons. The stories got harder. Some came with police reports, some came with screenshots, some came with nothing but the words, "I don't want to die invisible." That one stopped me, not because it was rare, but because I understood it too well. I didn't reply right away. I just sat there, letting the weight of that sentence settle. Then I wrote, "You won't. I see you. Keep writing." By the time spring came, I had stopped referring to what happened to me as the story. It wasn't the centerpiece anymore, it was the foundation, something solid I could build other things on top of. I no longer introduced myself as the woman who survived him. I introduced myself as the woman who made sure others didn't have to. One day, I returned to the courthouse, not for a trial, but for a meeting with a local judge. He'd read about the platform, about the impact reports we submitted. He wanted to introduce mandatory digital evidence review in protective order hearings. He asked how many women we thought had been overlooked. I told him, all the ones who never made it here. He didn't interrupt, he just nodded. And for once, a man in power didn't need convincing. Some people say the worst part of trauma is the moment it happens. They're wrong. The worst part is when you try to explain it, and they look at you like you're the one who set the fire. Now, no one could say that to me with a straight face, because I didn't just survive, I kept records, I built proof, and I passed the microphone to everyone else who thought their voice didn't count. So when people ask what I'm doing now, I tell them, I'm doing the work someone else should have done for me, and then I go back to it.